Now we've discussed all the melting flaws. Let's move on to dimensional type of flaws. These are flaws that are going to primarily affect our ability to meet the tolerances on the technical drawing. And therefore, if we don't, we might have problems with closure application or processing in the filling line. Here we have an example of a technician, one of our technicians here at AGR, having his Hollywood debut of showing us how to measure these vials on an optical comparator. It magnifies a particular type of the area of the vial, and now we can measure things such as the radius of features like threads or closures. And another second, we're going to see him just measuring the diameter. So in this particular view, he's just going to line up this part of the finish with looking at the actual diameter. So there are many different features that you can measure, many different characteristics you can try to see if we're meeting the specifications. These dimensional type of flaws, first one we'll look at is, again, a broad family of flaws that can roughly be categorized as malformed finishes. Malformed finishes are when we have issues with that finish area, the top portion of our container. There are many specific conditions with different names. Things like a dip finish, a saddle finish, unfilled finish, warped finish. They can all refer to slightly different variations of a malformed finish. They can cause a failure to seal, and if it does that, but yet makes it through the process, it can be critical. If it's just really extreme, it probably won't get through the whole process. It'll just break on our filling line. So this example in the upper right-hand corner, that's just severely deformed. That would probably be a functional flaw because it's just going to break. It won't make it through our system. It'll jam or fracture. The one on the bottom, though, this would be an unfilled finish. It could potentially actually be filled and capped. This could be critical because now we have a potential pathway for leakage. The next dimensional flaw is referred to as a leaner. Leaners are when we have a container that's not vertical. It doesn't meet our perpendicularity spec. Something about it caused it to tip, or maybe it was bumped while it was still hot. It sagged somewhere in the leer. It's not vertical enough. It exceeds our perpendicularity limit. Usually this is only going to cause types of problems during capping. It'll cause issues on our line because it's not really going to go well in our process. Extreme cases could potentially break during closure application. So we would call this leaners, usually a functional type of a flaw. The next flaw is referred to as a heel tap condition. Heel tap is when we have an uneven glass distribution on the bottom of our container. In English, that just means that we have thicker area and a thinner area on another side, so thin and thick. This is usually just a cosmetic flaw. It doesn't affect the strength, doesn't really have any functional effect. It's only an issue if we fall below our minimum glass thickness specification on the thin side. This is mostly a molded vial type of an issue. You can see here we have both molded type vials. The next flaw is referred to as a dropped bottom or rocker bottom condition. I referred to this a little bit earlier when we were introducing some of the effect categories. When we have a drop bottom, that's a container that has an inadequate or non-existent push-up. That's that concavity on the bottom of our container that tries to prevent that bottom surface from coming in contact with whatever our vial is sitting on. If it's a dropped bottom, well, that contour can sag to the point where it's touching, or potentially even protruding past the bearing surface. Here we can see an example where we have that sagging bottom, drop bottom on a molded vial, and here it is on a tubing vial. So it can happen on both. If it does, it can cause a dramatic increase in the stress during the closure application process. So something called a lensing failure, where the whole bottom drops out when you're capping, that's usually due to some sort of a drop bottom condition. If we have that bottom protruding so far past the bearing surface, that means that our container is not stable anymore. It will be rocking, and we call that a rocker bottom. One way that we can test for this drop bottom condition is to take our container, let's say we've got our vial, and now we've put some sandpaper on a flat surface and we rub it around. And then we look at that pattern that those abrasions create. If we do that, we see that a good contour we would have a abraded area that coincides with the bearing surface. So that would be good. On the right-hand side, we actually have abrasions occurring on almost the middle of this bottom. That's not good. That's an abnormal contour, and it means that we will have some sort of unusual loading condition when we are trying to put a stopper on this particular container. So that will greatly increase our stress. We've now looked at the first 3 parts of Section 2, mechanical flaws, melting flaws, and dimensional flaws. In the next 3 sections, we're going to examine those flaws that are created during the forming process. In Part 4, we're going to look at flaws related to forming exclusively for tubing containers.